This conference will now be recorded.
Well, hello everyone. It's Oscar Jofre, co-founder, president, and CEO of KoreConX, once again coming back to you live with Dr. Kiran Garimell. We're pretty excited. Now, this topic we're going to talk today, it's a doozy, even for me. It's but it is a question we get often asked, and regarding consensus. Now, I do want to make sure it's clear. We're not talking about consensus, the company. We, it's, but I think it's important for the general audience to get a perspective in what consensus is. And Dr. Kiran Garimella, most of the time, I usually end up doing all the talking, but I believe that in this one, you're going to be able to nail it better than I will. So, why don't you tell us what consensus exactly is, and why is it so important? Why is it that every conversation I go into, after people start talking about our chain and our protocol, they get to this? It'd be interesting to hear your insights.
Of course, Oscar, this is a very important topic in any distributed or decentralized systems. And as you know, the definition of consensus is pretty common, right? I mean, it's like, hey, do we all agree with what's happening with some transaction or with some data? Do we have a consensus here? That's the usual sense of the term consensus. And but in a decentralized or a distributed system like we have in blockchain, we have parties all over the place, and they're not in the same room, and they don't talk in the same systems. And so what happens is that when transactions happen and the distributed ledger copies are all over the place, everyone needs to agree that that same information without change is put on all of those different copies of the distributed ledger. And that's what consensus means, right? And as we'll see, this becomes a very challenging issue when you have network timing issues and transactions that might change, on the way from one party to the other. So all these things need to be resolved in a very efficient way. And yeah, this is a well-known problem for a very, very long time in distributed systems. But that's the reason why this is such a critical thing in blockchains.
So, I guess the way I'm understanding it, just to make sure I'm clear, is that it's a mechanism that allows people to come to an agreement on what this is, but everybody's anonymous, supposedly, right? I mean, you don't know who's doing the work, and they're just what are they doing? Are they validating anything? I mean, what's their purpose in all this?
Yeah, and the purpose is that two things, right? Number one, even when all the participants are permissioned and known to each other, there are usually well-meaning disagreements sometimes on what people thought they did, right? And that's the reason why both parties can be very honest and very upfront. But in the communication, what happens is that people say, I sent you X number of tokens, and the other person says, oh, I didn't get it. So there's all this things going on. So what people have to do is they say, well, we have to validate these things, and also to make sure that any transaction that happened because of a well-known policy, right? It's a securities regulation, it's a corporate law, whatever rights and restrictions, everybody agrees what the policy is, and the transaction is compliant with that particular policy. So it's an endorsement, and it's that validation that happens in these systems.
So I guess in business, I mean, when we deal with financial capital markets, they obviously it'll play an important role in selecting your right type of consensus, as you said, because selecting the wrong one could have different outcomes in depending on the business model you have.
Oh, absolutely. There are all kinds of really thorny issues when you get into a distributed or decentralized system for consensus. You have to make sure that the participants are who they are. That's number one, because you don't want the wrong parties agreeing to something, obviously. But you also have to make sure that you select the right algorithms for consensus. It's a technical issue, but some algorithms are much more fault tolerant. They will make sure that even if there are bad actors in the system, they can recover from that. But some algorithms aren't that great. So you got to be very careful about how you choose all of this. And one of the biggest misconceptions in blockchains, especially for financial services, is that there is one algorithm and one mechanism for consensus, and that's not necessarily always
Agreed.
true.
Yeah. We've seen that already. I know we'll talk a little bit more about it, but I was thinking in the back of my head as you were saying that there can't be just one, because in every scenario it requires a different type of finality or kind of consensus. I guess that's the word. I guess I'm looking for.
Exactly. Right.
That brings it all together. Okay. That's pretty interesting. So I guess companies need to, there's some key considerations they need to take back when they're going to apply a consensus. Could you give us some insight into that?
No, absolutely. So, people throw a lot of terms like safety in blockchains, and without really understanding what that actually means. And within the distributed systems and the blockchain technologies, there are very clear-cut definitions about what these things actually mean. So there are three major considerations that people who architect blockchains and the participants need to really care about. So number one is what we call technically the safety. Safety basically means that nothing bad should happen, right? So that's one part of that. I'll come back to that in a second. The second part is what's called liveness. Liveness basically means that eventually something good will happen, meaning the transaction is approved, it's validated, it's committed and written for all the parties in the distributed ledger. So that's the good outcome. But eventually something good should happen, right? And the third thing is really, if everyone is doing the same sequence of steps, the outcome should also be the same. Right, so that's what we call a deterministic output. So I can't execute, one set of transactions, and Oscar, you cannot execute the same set of transactions and both see different results, or I execute the same set of transactions at two different times and get two different results, right? If everything else is equal, so that can't happen. So being deterministic is a very, very important consideration. Now, Oscar, as you know, in blockchains, we'll say, nothing bad should happen. But we all know bad things do happen, right? 100% safety is virtually impossible in any system. Like somebody said, if you want a guarantee, go buy a toaster, right? We're not going to get guarantees like that in blockchain. But the fact is that, within the KoreChain platform itself, there are a number of layers of safeguards built in, so that if one fails on this side, something else will catch. If nothing catches, we got recourse. We can reverse things. We can make good. So all those things are important considerations.
Perfect. And I guess that's obviously leading us into, the overall consensus, and people keep asking us about why we made our choice in going with Hyperledger Fabric. Obviously, more people are being open-minded about it, that in a world of technology, we all have to evolve and understand that different chains will do different things, different consensus will work in different ways, but it's ultimately to solve a problem. And to solve a problem, you need to have a very depth understanding of it. And I think that that's one of the biggest takeaways I have as of late, is that I've been giving people this example, and it may be before a lot of people's time here, but I'm going to age myself a bit. But imagine for a minute, everyone that's listening to this, and it's an important example, that in the mid 80s, early 1980s, the only operating system that was of choice for the consumer was MS-DOS. And imagine if Bill Gates and Steve Jobs did not build the next generation of computing that we see today. And of course, it goes on and on with Google and others. So we need to understand that we're living in a world where technology and different types of chains are going to be great for some things, and others are going to be better for others. So, but coming back to the Hyperledger Fabric, I mean, this is our main reason. So how is the consensus in Hyperledger Fabric and the advantage in the financial capital markets?
So the consensus mechanisms that people talk about in blockchains, I mean, they have been around for a very, very long time, right? I mean, this is nothing that, people just cooked up in the last couple of years because of ICOs and stuff. It's not that. So a lot of distributed systems, it has a rich history in computer science and in math, going all the way back to the 80s, so to speak. And in fact, proof of work, which is used in Bitcoin and Ethereum, started way back in '92, right? So from '92 to '99, there was considerable development, and all kinds of auxiliary proof of acronyms came up, right? Proof of stake and proof of authority, proof of burn, and all this stuff came out. But the important thing here, Oscar, is to remember that we don't take a consensus algorithm like a proof of work and then try to shoehorn that for every application. You got to think about it and say, no, wait a minute. In the public blockchains, proof of work is essential because somebody has to demonstrate, and there are no bad actors, and so denial of service attacks, you got to prevent that. So somebody has to prove that computationally they did some work and burned up some electricity, right? So that's the intent of that. We get it. But in the financial services and in permission blockchains, we don't need to burden our participants with having to spend enormous tons of electricity and cost in trying to prove something and achieve consensus. So for the financial securities, the Hyperledger Fabric folks, they took a very, very mature approach, and basically said it's a multi-layered, pluggable, modular consensus mechanism. It isn't just one algorithm. There are a bunch of things that actually happen underneath that. And so people talk about things like Byzantine fault tolerance when you have bad actors. You've got Kafka consensus. You've got Raft, which is a newer algorithm that is based on Paxos, which has been going on since the late 80s and early 90s. So there are a bunch of different things that are going on in this space, right? And so basically there are three important layers within consensus in Fabric that were extremely relevant for us. One of them is the endorsement. The second is the ordering of the transactions in the right blocks. And then finally, it's the complete validation of what's going on in these blocks. And then, of course, it's a finality and commitment of these blocks to the chain. All of this is coming under the umbrella of blockchain.
Perfect. So and like everything else, this is specifically, and we need to be very careful for people to understand that this particular consensus is what is needed in order to satisfy not only the financial, but it's because of regulatory reasons. These are the requirements that companies need to follow because of their bylaws or securities laws that they need to follow in their particular regions. And that's the nice thing about Hyperledger Fabric. And obviously the KoreChain sits on top of that. And we are, from our work, we're customizing that consensus to fit our requirements.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. So you've got different types of participants, you've got different types of asset classes, you've got different types of transactions going on. Not everything needs to be proven in the same way, right? So we got to, mix and match who are the participants, who are the endorsers, who are the peers, and then kind of look at them and say, okay, for these people, we just need these parties to come to the table and agree to that. We don't need the entire planet, all the peers on the entire planet having to weigh in, right? I mean, it makes absolutely no sense for somebody sitting in, a completely different country, in Estonia or Africa or China or India. It doesn't matter where, to have them approve another transaction that's happening in Slovenia or Germany or UK or US. It makes no sense, right? So we got to pick and choose who we want to invite to the table for consensus. And usually these are, as you know from securities regulation and contract law, parties to the contract need to have consensus. It's not everybody else. So the rest of the people say, oh, we got it. This is a transaction that's approved. And now we can commit that to our blockchain for our distributed ledger copy, and we're good to go, right? So we got to figure that out.
That's perfect. Well, listen, as always, it's an educational element, and a few things about our KoreChain and consensus that I know you've been saying this quite a bit, but these are important points here that you've covered here that I think people need to be aware, because whenever you have a consensus, in particular in securities law, but this relates back to us, right? So these are the differentiating points that are related to our KoreChain.
Oh, absolutely. So if you look at the public blockchains, what would make people who need to validate transactions sit down and validate transactions? Well, a lot of electricity, right? Why would they do that? They need an economic incentive to do that. And that's the reason why there is mining, there's gas prices, there are different ways that'll happen. But in our world, we don't need to burden our participants with these uncertainties associated with cryptocurrency, variations in the exchange rates, and if the sufficient gas price is not there for consensus, there is no validation, there's no commitment, right? So we can't have that. We have to have guaranteed transactions going through. We cannot have what is called the probabilistic finality. We need certain finality. So that's the reason why we don't have any mining. We don't solve crazy puzzles. There's no gas prices. We completely decouple the incentive mechanism, but we incentivize our participants in entirely different ways through partnerships and stuff like that, right? So that's an important consideration and difference between the fabric and the core chain consensus. Now, the other one, of course, is that it's not just one mechanism. It's multiple layers. It's very important to understand, how many safeguards there are within this kind of an approach. And the other part, of course, is that all of this is dynamic. As I mentioned, it's not a static, one-size-fits-all type of consensus.
No, I agree. And that's an important takeaway for everybody. I mean, I think we're going to see different types, but our goal today was really walking them through what the consensus generality was, how that fits in, how is that different for financial capital markets, and of course, how are we as KoreConX within our KoreChain, how we're using consensus to make sure that we have finality, and obviously we take the worry away from those that are involved. So, Dr. Kiran, as always, thank you very much for taking the time. And everyone out there, you want to learn more about our KoreChain, our online platform that's available today, just simply go to www.koreconx.io, KoreConX.io, and you can download our core papers. You can even register to use our platform today. It's ready to go. Thank you again, and look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.